Hi everyone, it's Katrina. History is full of unanswered questions. Today we are diving deep into the most compelling historical mysteries that remain unsolved. Who were the alien kings from China? What really happened to Alexander the Great? And was there really one global civilization that ruled the world? Let's take a look. The Alien Kings of China. An ancient city as China is hiding more secrets than the Vatican's secret archives, and that's saying something. No one can figure out if this ruined metropolis was home to an advanced race of humans, a group of supernatural giants, or actual alien kings. Let's start our investigation at the Sanqingdui Museum in Sichuan, China, home to one of the most mind-blowing archaeological finds ever. When you walk in through the front doors of this museum, you are faced with a barefoot bronze king. He stands an incredible 8.5 feet tall, making most people feel like dwarves. The giant bronze statue is wearing anklets and has his fists clenched and a judgmental look in his eye. But just who is this ancient giant? Experts believe this impressive statue represents a king of the Shu Kingdom, which ruled the Sichuan area around 3,100 years ago. This guy is dressed to the nines, fully decked out in bronze layers. He has on 3 short-sleeved bronze garments decorated with dragons. He was definitely someone important. According to Professor Huang Nengfu, an arts and design expert from Tsinghua University, this might just be the oldest dragon robe in Chinese history. Long before emperors were strutting around in embroidered silk, this guy was out here setting trends in full bronze couture. And it turns out the intricate pattern on his outfit could be the earliest example of Shu embroidery, pushing its history back to the Shang dynasty of the 16th century BC, way earlier than historians thought. But just wait a second, because not everything here is as it seems. The Shu Kingdom may not have been entirely human. Our Bronze King may have had some green alien blood pumping through his veins. The Sanqingdui ruins, located just a few miles from Chengdu, have been a gold mine for archaeologists. Since 1929, they have unearthed over 10,000 artifacts dating back as far as 5,000 years. And these aren't just dusty old relics. Sanqingdui is crowded with busted city walls and sacrificial pits filled with strange oddities. The artifacts and ruins have proven beyond a doubt that the Shu Kingdom was a highly advanced civilization. They had agriculture, mining, ceramics, and tools that were ahead of their time. But then one day, poof, they disappeared into thin air. No trace left behind. No dramatic farewell. How does an entire civilization just ghost history? Some scholars suggest that a massive earthquake or a flood forced the people of Sanqingdui to abandon their city and start fresh somewhere else. Others think they were conquered by another unknown civilization. But the theory that really gets conspiracy lovers excited is the one that screams it was aliens. Some believe extraterrestrials were involved for a few reasons. The artifacts found in Sanqingdui look like alien artifacts. It's that simple. Instead of creating figurines and statues of humans, this culture made figurines and statues of alien beings with huge eyes and freaky bodies. Plus, the whole area is a UFO hotspot. People have been reporting alien saucers in the sky for the past 20 years or so, and there is still more to uncover. So far, only about a quarter of the site has been investigated. No one knows what else is buried under this ancient place. Tombs of giants, mausoleums for alien gods. Chen Xiandan, deputy curator of the Sichuan Provincial Museum, hints that more groundbreaking discoveries are likely on the way. Could it be more mysterious statues, a lost library, an ancient time machine? Whatever is discovered, I'll be sure to keep you posted. The man who stole Alexander the Great's corpse. It's time for a real-life ancient heist involving a stolen corpse, political backstabbing, and a decoy body. If Netflix ever needs a new historical thriller, this is it. Alexander the Great's body was stolen by one of his buddies. No wonder archaeologists can't find his tomb. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great was dead. He had just established one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, and suddenly he was gone. This left his land up for grabs. His generals, known as the Diadochi, were not about to play nice in their desperate greed for power. Here's the thing about the body of a dead king. Owning that body gave a would-be ruler legitimacy. Think of it as a power-up in a really morbid video game. To the Macedonian army, Alexander wasn't just a king, he was a demigod. A seer even claimed that the land where Alexander was buried would become invincible. Whoever got his corpse wasn't just getting a skeleton, they were claiming the right to rule. There were two main guys who wanted Alexander's corpse for themselves. First was Perdiccas, regent of Alexander's empire. He wanted to bury him in Macedon to assert control. The other key figure was Ptolemy I, governor of Egypt. Ptolemy was eyeing independence and was not about to let Perdiccas have that power boost. So Ptolemy pulled off one of history's greatest body snatches. Alexander's funeral procession was no ordinary hearse ride. By 321 BC, after 2 years of embalming and preparation, a massive golden carriage the size of a rolling temple was built to transport his body. Ptolemy knew he couldn't let Perdiccas take the body to Macedon, so he did what any power-hungry strategist would do. He bribed the guys guarding it. Classic heist move. The commander of the escort, Aridaeus, was on Ptolemy's payroll and conveniently decided to take a detour. Instead of heading toward Macedon, the grand funeral procession veered south, straight toward Egypt. Perdiccas, realizing he was being bamboozled, sent troops to intercept the caravan. But Ptolemy was ready. He personally rode out with an army to welcome the procession near Damascus. Officially, he was just paying his respects. In reality, he was guarding his prize. Perdiccas' men tried to stop them, but failed. Ptolemy's reinforcements were too strong. What happened next is an enduring mystery. Some accounts claim that Ptolemy used a fake corpse to further throw Perdiccas off. One ancient source claims Ptolemy created a dummy wrapped in royal robes and sent it off on a well-lit grand procession. Meanwhile, Alexander's real body was secretly smuggled through hidden routes. Ptolemy supposedly took the body to Memphis, Egypt, and later moved it to Alexandria, where it remained for centuries, right up until it mysteriously disappeared around the 4th century AD. That was centuries after Ptolemy used Alexander's body to found the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would end with the death of Cleopatra 300 years later. As for Perdiccas, he was furious. He launched an invasion of Egypt in 320 BC, but his army mutinied and he was assassinated by his own officers. What a brutal failure. His own army hated him. I guess the moral of the story is you don't mess with Ptolemy. But the question remains, where was Alexander the Great really buried? And will we ever be able to find his real tomb? And now for a quick break, but first, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Donovan Wood and Nox Diablo for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Eaten by the Paris catacombs. A labyrinth of 6 million souls, countless skeletons, plus the elusive remains of some who entered the maze and never left. I'm talking about the Paris catacombs, one of the most frightening skeleton pits in the world. If you visited this place in Paris, you know how creepy it is. Just imagine wandering through dimly lit tunnels, the air thick with history and the faint scent of damp limestone. Skulls and femurs line the walls, arranged in eerie patterns. It's silent until you hear a faint scuffle behind you. You turn, but there's nothing there, just shadows. Yet you swear something moved. This is the average experience in the Paris catacombs, a 150-mile labyrinth beneath the City of Light, where over 6 million souls rest, and where some visitors have entered and then vanished. But just how did Paris end up with a basement of bones? In 18th century Paris, the city was booming, but so was a massive corpse problem. By the 1700s, Paris's cemeteries were stuffed to the brink, particularly Les Innocents, the city's oldest and largest burial ground. At first, people ignored the issue, but then things got really bad. So bad, it couldn't be ignored. Paris was a wasteland of corpses. They overflowed from graves, poked out of the ground, and there was the occasional corpse tsunami. Yikes. In 1780, part of a cellar wall collapsed. Decomposing bodies spilled into a house's basement like a nightmarish fountain. The stench was absolutely vile. The plague risk was off the charts. Paris had no choice. The overflowing cemeteries had to go. Thus, the Paris catacombs were born. Between 1787 and 1814, workers, mostly poor Parisians desperate for employment, dug up the dead and transported cartloads of bones through the streets at night. Why at night? Because nothing says sweet dreams like watching a wagon full of skeletons roll past your window. Thus began the arrangement of the bones into intricate walls, columns, and patterns, transforming the tunnels into a macabre underground monument. In the years since then, the catacombs have attracted the adventurous and the reckless, but not everyone who goes in to check out this ghoulish labyrinth makes it out. In the early 1990s, a group of illegal explorers called cataphiles were roaming the tunnels when they stumbled upon an abandoned video camera. The footage was terrifying. It was like the Blair Witch Project, but in real life. The camera belonged to a man who had ventured too deep, got disoriented, and then panicked. The video shows him running aimlessly, his breathing is ragged, before suddenly dropping the camera and disappearing into the darkness. He was never seen again. To this day, no one knows what happened to the man. The footage was later featured in a 2000s documentary, and it inspired the horror movie As Above, So Below. But the mystery has never officially been solved. And things still go wrong in modern times. In 2017, 3 teenagers snuck into the catacombs through an unmarked entrance, planning for a night of adventure. Instead, they got 72 hours of pure terror. The tunnels are a maze of identical passageways with 0 cell service and pitch black darkness once you go deep enough. The teens wandered aimlessly for 3 days, running out of water, before a rescue team with search dogs finally found them. They nearly died down there. Would you be crazy enough to venture into the catacombs at night on your own? Let me know how brave you are in the comments. I'm definitely not brave. The origin of all megaliths. What if I told you that all of Europe's giant stone circles came from one place? It would mean every stone circle from Ireland to France was constructed by the same mysterious civilization. It turns out this isn't just some crazy conspiracy theory. Stonehenge wasn't a solo act after all. It might have been part of a huge prehistoric architectural movement that started in one place, Brittany, France. New research suggests that all of Europe's massive stone structures, from the Ring of Brodgar and Orkney to Scandinavian dolmens, can be traced back to one origin point around 4,500 BC. What scientists are trying to say is that one small group had a eureka moment 6,500 years ago that led to the biggest and most widespread building trend in human history. For a long time, scholars debated whether ancient Europeans independently came up with the idea of building giant stone monuments, or if the idea spread from one culture to another. The same mystery lurks behind the pyramids. How did different cultures around the world come up with the same idea to build pyramids? It's something no one has ever been able to solve. This study, led by Bettina Schultz-Paulsen, analyzed over 2,400 prehistoric sites across Europe. Bettina and her team found that the first megaliths appeared in Brittany, France. The idea spread rapidly along the coastlines, reaching Spain, Portugal, the UK, the Mediterranean, and eventually Scandinavia. But here's where things get even crazier. Bettina doesn't think this spread of megalithic knowledge would have been possible without advanced seafaring technology. She believes that people were sailing the 7 seas 2,000 years earlier than anyone thought. The rapid spread of these massive stone monuments means early Europeans weren't just wandering around on foot like Stone Age power walkers. They weren't floating around on primitive rafts either. They had seaworthy boats capable of crossing long distances. But what does this mean for history in general? It certainly solves a few ancient mysteries. It could confirm that Neolithic Europeans belonged to a shared culture or religion, a sort of proto-paganism that connected all the different tribes of Europe through the building of massive stonework. Or is it all just a coincidence? Let me know what you think about a unified prehistoric Europe in the comments. This ancient masterpiece is still missing. Okay, we've all been there, staring at the Mona Lisa, trying to crack her smile. But honestly, if you want real mystery, the kind that makes art historians lose sleep, let me introduce you to the real Houdini of Renaissance art, Raphael's portrait of a young man. This painting pulled the ultimate disappearing act during World War II and still hasn't been found. Most historians regard it as the most important missing piece of art from the war. Now, who do you suppose stole this painting by the great Renaissance master Raphael? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't the Allies. As usual, it was the Nazis. They lifted the painting from Poland during their invasion, and no one has been able to recover it. But what's the big deal about this piece? It's believed to be Raphael's self-portrait. It's such a rare piece of art that there are no exact copies anywhere. Unlike most Renaissance paintings, this one left behind 0 faithful reproductions. Yes, you can Google portrait of a young man and find results, but they're all going to be a little bit different. Because the original painting is gone and there was never a copy made, no one alive today knows what the real thing looked like. Except that is whoever secretly has it hanging up in their mansion. Let's go back to 1939 when Poland was being invaded by Nazi Germany. While most people were scrambling to survive, the Czartoryski family was freaking out about their art. Prince Augustin Joseph Czartoryski clearly had good taste. He grabbed a few priceless gems from the Czartoryski Museum, such as Leonardo's Lady with an Ermine, Rembrandt's Landscape with the Good Samaritan, and the ever-elusive Portrait of a Young Man. The prince stashed these masterpieces in a little residence in a little town, hoping that no one would find them. But of course, the Gestapo showed up like they were on a treasure hunt, looking for anything shiny and valuable. Nazis were basically crows coveting shiny things. The Nazis ended up snatching these artworks, and they found their way into the hands of Hans Frank, Hitler's personal buddy who ran the general government. Not exactly the type of guy you want hanging your art in his home. Hans took his artwork to Krakow, which was all well and good up until the Soviet forces arrived. The Germans bailed, and the portrait of a young man went MIA. In 1945, the Allies caught up with Frank and charged him with war crimes. He was put on trial and executed in 1946. With Hans Frank's death, the Allies found some of his looted art. Almost all of it, but Portrait of a Young Man was nowhere to be found. How much money do you think a Raphael painting is worth? I'll give you a hint. Even most millionaire CEOs can't afford a Raphael. In 1994, Lynn H. Nicholas suggested that if the painting ever reappears, it could be worth over $100 million. That was 30 years ago. It could be worth double now, but it remains elusive. Where the heck is it? That's the multi-million-dollar question. The only piece of this painting left is its original empty frame, currently hanging at the National Museum of Krakow. Dr. Satan. If you wanted to stand out as a monster during World War II, a time when the world was running a competition for the worst human ever, you really had to go above and beyond. And let me tell you, Marcel Petiot, better known as Dr. Satan, put in the overtime. This guy wasn't just a serial killer. He was a doctor, a scam artist, a fraudster, and a man whose moral compass had long since packed up and moved to another country. His story is a bizarre blend of horror and incompetence, as if Jack the Ripper had also been in charge of your taxes and medical care. The birth of a monster is the best place to start for this story. Marcel Petiot was born in 1897 in Auxerre, France, and let's just say that from the beginning, people should have known this kid needed serious help. By age 11, he was already out there committing the kinds of acts that make parents consider locking up the knives. One day, young Marcel decided to bring his father's gun to school and fire it off for absolutely no reason. Naturally, he got expelled. Repeatedly expelled and expelled until school wasn't going to be happening. Over the years, he kept himself busy committing various crimes, stealing from a postbox, vandalizing public property, that kind of thing. Marcel took his criminal talents to the French military in 1916, because why wouldn't you give an unstable thief access to weapons in the middle of a war? Serving in World War I didn't exactly straighten him out. He managed to get himself injured in battle, which landed him a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors diagnosed him with a mental breakdown, which is what happens when you mix war, crime, and a guy who probably should have been in a padded room in the first place. After the war, Petiot took advantage of an accelerated education program for veterans. In just 8 months, he wrapped up medical school and set up shop. He was too unstable for war, but he managed to get a medical degree and become a licensed doctor. He was not a good doctor. If you walked into his office with a headache, there was a good chance you'd leave addicted to morphine and missing your wallet. Thankfully, his scandalous practice was found out and he resigned. But then came World War II, and Petio cranked up the evil to new levels. He posed as a resistance fighter and convinced desperate Jews and resistance members that he could smuggle them out of Nazi-occupied France for a price. Only there was no smuggling or rescuing going on. Instead of helping them, he injected them with cyanide under the guise of vaccinations. Then he robbed them and disposed of their bodies. He dumped them in the Seine River, until that got too sketchy, at which point he began burning the bodies. And thus came his downfall in 1944. It turns out that when you burn human remains in your fireplace, people notice. On Monday morning, March 6, 1944, black smoke poured from the chimney of a 3-story stylish home on a residential street in Paris, and it continued for days. The neighbors started to wonder what was happening at Dr. Petio's house. Some months earlier, 2 trucks had come by, picking up and dropping off 30 to 40 heavy suitcases and sacks filled with who knows what. Since the smoke was so bad, the police entered the house, and what they saw was so disturbing it made them vomit. The coal stove was burning full blast with a human arm dangling from its open door. Nearby was a heap of body parts that was so large it was hard to tell how many victims there were. There were suitcases, clothing, and personal belongings of his victims scattered all over the place. He told the police, "Don't worry, I'm with the resistance. They're German soldiers, so they don't matter. Good riddance." However, the sheer amount of bodies was too much, and he was dubbed Dr. Satan in the press. Somehow, he managed to escape and hid during the liberation of France, becoming a spy and a captain for a few months with the French forces of the interior. He was finally caught even amidst all the chaos and was convicted of 26 murders, although the real number was likely much higher. No one will ever know how many people he killed during World War II. Did humans live with dinosaurs? Figurines found in the Mexican countryside might just prove that human history as we know it is a lie. The timeline is all wrong. Human beings and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Your ancestors rode around on triceratops. The proof comes from a discovery that is surprisingly old. In 1944, a German merchant named Waldemar Julsrud was out horseback riding in the Mexican countryside when he spotted a weird little figurine sticking out of the dirt. Waldemar dug up the figurine, then another, and then another, and then a few thousand. The accidental discovery sparked one of the biggest historical debates ever. Waldemar discovered over 33,500 figurines buried in wells near Acámbaro, Mexico. And these weren't your average ancient ceramics. They depicted humans hanging out with dinosaurs. Who doesn't want to do that? The figurines showed all of your favorites: T-Rex, Stegosaurus, and weird raptor-looking creatures. Some figurines even showed dinosaurs on leashes. And the figurines also showed giant monkeys and weird gods. At this point, why not? Naturally, this discovery made scholars lose their minds. Mainstream science says dinosaurs peaced out about 65 million years ago, while humans only showed up about 200,000 years ago. Either we've got an epic history book typo, or these figurines were someone's ancient attempt at sci-fi fan art. At first, researchers were intrigued. In 1968, a carbon-14 test done by Isotopes Incorporated dated the figurines between 1100 and 4500 BC. Then, in 1972, thermoluminescence dating by the University of Pennsylvania gave them an age of around 2500 BC. Could dinosaurs have really roamed the Earth only 4,500 years ago? Dr. Charles Hapgood, a professor at the University of New Hampshire, certainly thought so. He believed the figurines were the real deal. Meanwhile, Dr. Eduardo Noguera, leading a Mexican government investigation in 1954, also initially thought the discovery was amazing. But then he suddenly changed his mind, with his official report denying their authenticity. Then came Charles Di Peso, an archaeologist from Arizona. Charles basically went, "Nah, these are fake." He pointed out that the figurines didn't have the usual wear and tear of ancient artifacts and looked suspiciously fresh. Let's be real, if humans had been riding triceratops into battle, we'd have way more than just a few figurines to prove it. Still, the Acámbaro figurines remain one of archaeology's weirdest mysteries. Do the pyramids debunk the Bible? According to some, the pyramids actually debunk the Bible, proving its stories are nothing more than tall tales. People have been staring at the pyramids for thousands of years, wondering how they were built. A new theory claims the pyramids were built way before Noah's flood, which supposedly means the flood was more like a local rainstorm, not a worldwide splash. The mystery here is that if the flood really happened, the pyramids should currently be buried under a mountain of dirt. But since the pyramids are unharmed, it is physically obvious that they were never hit by a flood at all. According to the Bible, Egypt's first settlers came from the land of Babel. You remember the Tower of Babel that was punished by God and came crashing down, and then suddenly we couldn't understand each other? Humans worked together to create the massive tower to reach the heavens, which God thought was a bit boastful. So he broke human languages into dozens of smaller languages so people couldn't work together anymore. After that, some of the people from Babel arrived in Egypt. What this means is that the first Egyptians weren't wandering around in loincloths trying to figure out fire. They already knew how to write and had culture. When they rolled up in Egypt, they were ready to build pyramids. The Bible also tells us that the flood occurred before the Tower of Babel, 700 years before, to be exact. The pyramids don't have any flood damage because they were built by the same guys who constructed the Tower of Babel 7 centuries after the flood was over. The timeline is crazy confusing, and it changes depending on your source. Some scientists don't even think the Tower of Babel was real. Some say the pyramids could be over 5,000 years old, meaning they definitely predate the flood. But there is one other crazy mystery you should know about. The last great pyramid in Egypt was built by Amenemhet III, and some scholars think this pharaoh could have been the father of Moses. Yeah, that Moses. 10 Commandments Moses. Pharaoh Amenemhet's daughter, Sobek Neferu, could be the princess who found Moses floating in a basket. A lot of scholars don't know what to make of this. There are definitely some connections between the Bible, the pyramids, and the origins of ancient Egypt, but separating fact from fiction is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. Thomas Edison calls a ghost. Did Thomas Edison know something we don't about communicating with the dead? Check out Edison's weirdest and least successful invention, the ghost phone. In the 1920s, when inventors were obsessed with pushing the boundaries of science, Thomas Edison decided to take on the ultimate challenge, chatting with the dead. Forget light bulbs and phonographs, Edison set his sights on building a spirit phone. According to reports, Edison and his team secretly gathered in a lab, rigging up speakers, generators, and other experimental gadgets to capture the voices of the dearly departed. One magazine, Modern Mechanics, claimed that they even shone a tiny pencil of light into the darkness to detect minuscule particles, supposedly remnants of human personalities. After tense hours of watching, nothing happened. The ghosts weren't returning Edison's calls. You might be thinking there is no way any of this really happened, but Edison did publicly announce in 1920 that he was working on a device to communicate with spirits. Unlike the smoke and mirrors tactics of mediums, who were all the rage in the 1920s, Edison insisted that his approach was strictly scientific. He claimed that if there was an afterlife, it should be measurable, like electricity or sound waves. Historians have long debated whether Edison was serious or trolling the public. How hilarious would it be to learn that Edison was America's first real troll? No blueprints or working models of the spirit phone were ever found. But in 2015, a French journalist named Philippe Baudouin discovered a rare edition of Edison's diary. It contained an unpublished chapter detailing his theories on the spirit world. According to Edison, our personalities are made up of tiny entities like atoms, which might persist after death. He believed his device could amplify and record these ghostly fragments, just like a phonograph preserves sound. It was a scientific seance. Scientists and the paranormal mix like peanut butter and jelly. Even Alexander Graham Bell experimented with an ear phonautograph, a contraption that used a human ear and skull to record sound vibrations. The early 20th century was crazy with bizarre inventions. After all, you don't know if it works until you try it. Lost cities changed the history of the Amazon. Forget the fedora and the whip. Modern-day archaeologists are finding lost cities in the Amazon with lasers. Because why wrestle a python when you can just scan it from space? And what they are finding is blowing their mind. Lost cities dwell deep in the Amazon rainforest. They hide in places so remote that to reach them, you must dodge venomous snakes while swatting away 1,000 mosquitoes per second and sweating like you just ran a marathon in a sauna. Sounds like an awesome vacation, right? Luckily for archaeologists, they have access to satellites and lasers, so they don't have to battle snakes and mosquitoes. Researchers recently uncovered a sprawling network of lost cities in Ecuador's Upano Valley, once home to at least 10,000 farmers. These ancient metropolises, dating to at least 500 BC, were packed with roads, neighborhoods, and garden cities rivaling the sophistication of the Maya. It's shaking up everything scientists thought they knew about humanity in the Amazon. For over 2 decades, archaeologist Stephen Rothstein of France's National Center for Scientific Research had an inkling that something big was hiding beneath the jungle floor. And he was right. Using lasers to peek through the trees, he identified a valley of lost cities spanning more than 116 square miles. One of the core cities, named Quilamope, is as large as Egypt's Giza Plateau or the Grand Avenue of Teotihuacan in Mexico. It's a huge ancient metropolis hidden under layers of trees, vines, and centuries of jungle growth. And it's not alone. These newly discovered cities predate previous Amazonian urban finds like Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos by 1,000 years. Archaeologist Fernando Mejia from the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador said scientists have barely scratched the surface. There is a whole world buried in the Amazon, and only now are researchers beginning to find it. Who were these ancient people? How far back in history do they go? Only time will hopefully tell. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Porto Flavia. The sea harbor at Porto Flavia in Italy is unlike any other in the world. Located in Sardinia, at first glance it looks like a small castle carved into the rock, but there is much more here than meets the eye. It is actually considered a masterpiece of engineering, built in 1924 as a mine. This construction allowed workers to drop recently mined ore directly from the mine and onto the cargo ships that waited in the harbor below. This invention took local mining to a whole new level of convenience and efficiency. Mining operations in Sardinia goes back to the early 1600s, but in the 20th century it began reaching peak production. A lot of different ores were in demand at that time, such as zinc and lead, and by modernizing the methods of farming the precious metals, workers were able to extract and ship far more than any other time in history. The issue was efficiency. It was no easy thing to get the lead ore from the mine to the nearest port. It was a huge hassle, expensive, and a giant waste of time. So, to cut down on how much time it took, Porto Flavia was built right on the side of the sea cliff. They created an exit right above the water, with a sheer drop going into the ocean below. The mines were connected by tunnels, and instead of carting the ore all the way up the mine, down the road to the nearest port, then onto the vessel, they could literally just lower the ore from within the mine directly onto the ship. It was as revolutionary as Amazon sending you a box of cookies using a drone right to your front door. It only took 2 years to build this unique port and reduced production costs by an estimated 70%. What once used to take several weeks or months was shortened to a few days. Over time, mining operations slowed down, the industry gradually died, and the Porto Flavia mine closed in the 1990s. It is now being preserved and is on the list to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Externsteine. In Germany, the Externsteine is a unique set of rock formations that are historically and culturally significant. Unlike standing stones that have been moved, it is a natural formation that has been altered by human hands over thousands of years. The stones may have been a sacred site for worship or sacrifice, but their meaning to ancient humans remains a mystery. The stones have been altered and used by many different groups of people, and each group may have used them for entirely different reasons. Paleolithic and Mesolithic stone tools have been found at the site, indicating it may have been some type of sanctuary or even astronomical center like Stonehenge. There were caves carved into the faces of the rock towers with windows that aligned with each summer solstice. There are symbols carved onto the rock indicating it was a center for Saxon pagan rituals. Saxons were known to gather in nature to worship their gods, and the monoliths would have been the perfect place. Later, when the Emperor Charlemagne forced the Saxons to convert to Christianity, he destroyed all pagan temples and ordered their sacred sites to be marked with the Christian cross. A monastery was built at Externsteine, founded in the 9th century. During this time, monks carved religious scenes into the rock. Stone railings were built in 1663, long after the old Saxons had vanished. After Charlemagne and the monks, in the era of the Nazis, Himmler had excavations performed here to look for proof of an ancient Germanic civilization, though no proof was ever found. These sacred rocks have seen a lot over the years, but not many people know about them outside of Germany. It is now a place for locals to go walking and hiking. Ellora Caves. The Ellora Caves is an ancient site located in India, listed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site with ties to Hinduism and Buddhism. The amazing rock temples here were carved right out of a hill, back between the 6th and 8th centuries AD. The builders started from the top of the rock and worked their way downwards, carving intricate details as they went. This would have required enormous skill by talented mathematicians and engineers. The most recent and most impressive, perhaps, is the Kailasa Temple, standing nearly 100 feet high. It's the largest monument in the world cut from rock, and yet not that many people have even heard of it. You will find 35 caves and temples here, and each one was carved by hand. The ancient people took what was a mountain of rock and using chisels and hammers dug into it like a sculptor with a block of ice until they had created all these amazing monuments. One of the earliest caves is a great example of Hindu architecture, complete with an inner sanctum, a walkway for worshippers to move around, vestibules, and plenty of reliefs and carvings decorating the interior, depicting scenes from sacred Hindu texts. At the entrance of the cave, there is also a large dancing Shiva surrounded by musicians and slaying the buffalo demon king. All these statues and reliefs are still in shockingly good condition, considering the site is around 1,400 years old. The biggest mystery here is, where did the builders take all that rock that they carved out? Researchers have not found any nearby, and many wonder what they did to seemingly pulverize all that stone to make it disappear. Ayutthaya. About 40 miles from Bangkok, the current capital of Thailand, there is a place much older called Ayutthaya, and it's a historic city founded back in 1350. This was about 100 years after the old capital of Sukhothai was founded in 1238, Sukhothai being the very first Siamese capital in what is today Thailand. Ayutthaya became a prosperous city by 1378 and remained the capital for another 400 years, until late in the 1700s. The city was named by King Ramathibodi, who actually based its name not on himself but on a magical kingdom from an old Thai legend, the Ramakien. Ayutthaya remained an important stronghold because of its trading ports, which welcomed international merchants from all over Europe, England, and further east. It was also a preferred stopping point for these traders, who were shocked and fascinated by the impressive temples and palaces and the winding waterways that acted not only as byways through the city, but also as blockades protecting it. Forget walls, Ayutthaya had great moats preventing them from being sieged. But unfortunately, the protection granted to them by their waterways and temple fortresses only lasted so long. The old capital was attacked by the Burmese and burned to the ground. The Burmese killed every last person in sight, and those who managed to survive were taken into slavery. The city fell in the year 1767, and the ruins of what was once a great and prosperous civilization are amazingly still standing today. The Alhambra. The Alhambra is a magnificent palace, fortress, and citadel that should be considered one of the wonders of the world. Located in Granada, Spain, this magical place was once the palace of the Moorish monarchs and was the inspiration for many songs and stories. Built in the 8th century, Alhambra means Red Fort in Arabic. It is the only surviving piece of major architecture from the Islamic Golden Age, when the Nasrid dynasty ruled the area as the last Islamic kingdom anywhere in Western Europe. This palace is huge. It's not like the crumbling castles you see in other parts of Europe. It's a whole complex that spans 26 acres and has at least a mile of walls, along with 30 individual towers. The first historical records of the palace date back to the 9th century, to a man who allegedly sought refuge in a small fortress during fighting between the Muslims and the Muladis. The small fort grew into a bigger fort, and by 1238, the Alhambra became the new royal residence of Muhammad bin al-Hamar, the leader of the Nasrid dynasty. When Islamic rule ended in 1492, when they were conquered by King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile, Spain was unified under the Catholic monarchy, and the Islamic rulers were banished. The Alhambra was then altered to better suit the Catholics, which meant the mosques were destroyed and many parts of the great structure were changed, but they were careful to maintain much of the artwork and precious parts of the palace. The ancient city of Volubilis. The ancient city of Volubilis stands today as a sad ruin near the holy town of Moulay Idriss Zerhoun in Morocco. Despite it being in such rough shape, it is still the best preserved Roman ruin anywhere in the country, and came from a time before Christian rule, when the region was under the local administration of the Kingdom of Mauritania. It was also one of the most remote cities anywhere in the Roman Empire. The city was once home to about 20,000 people, and prospered thanks to olive and olive oil production, which was an enormous demand at the time. The city boasted many temples, grand residences, and stunning works of art. But things came to a dramatic halt in the year 40 AD. The residents revolted against the Roman invasion. The city hung around for a bit longer until the Romans eventually withdrew from the area in 285. Then, when Islam arrived in the region, many of the old structures and temples were destroyed. The residents fled to the local mountains, and the place was widely abandoned. As recently as the 18th century, a horrible earthquake hit the region, and what few buildings remained were shaken and destroyed. Persepolis. Persepolis was the capital of the Achaemenid Empire, erected at the foot of the Mountain of Mercy in what is today Iran. According to UNESCO World Heritage, it is one of the greatest archaeological sites in the entire world. It was a gem of the old Persian kingdom, with construction beginning in 518 BC by Darius the Great. He built a wide terrace, and the kings that succeeded him, like his son, the infamous Xerxes I, continued to add things, such as the huge Apadana Palace and the Throne Hall. At its peak, the structure was of mythical proportions, with large halls, countless grand structures, and walls covered in beautiful works of art. Today, it's little more than a large ruin, but over 2,500 years ago, it was a spectacle. It was likely so big that archaeologists can't even say for certain what other permanent structures flanked the main palace. It was likely more of a small city than just a palace and a seat of power. Persepolis was taken by the army of Alexander the Great in the year 330 BC. Shortly after this, the palace was consumed by fire. Alexander the Great saw to it that the entire place was destroyed and could never be used again by the Persians, which was not something Alexander usually did. He wasn't a scorched earth kind of guy. But considering the memory of the Persian king Xerxes burning Athens 150 years prior was still fresh in the minds of the Greeks and Macedonians, historians believe Alexander destroyed Persepolis so effectively as revenge. High Bridge. One of the oldest bridges in England crosses the River Witham in the historical old city of Lincoln. It's called High Bridge, and it was constructed in the year 1160. What's truly unique about this historical bridge is that it's one of only 3 still standing in England that has houses on it. It's also the oldest of the 3. It was an ordinary bridge until around 1550, when timber-framed structures were built over it. There was originally a chapel in the medieval era, but it was torn down in 1762. Today, there is a cafe, a shop that sells traditional baked goods, and some very small apartments. It's a unique piece of architecture that can't be found anywhere else. The bridge also has a bit of humor. Its arc forms a narrow opening underneath that boaters pass through. It's been dubbed the Glory Hole, and it's the only way to get from the River Witham to the old harbor of Brayford Pool. Borobudur. The Temple of Borobudur in Indonesia is an ancient Mahayana Buddhist temple on the island of Java. It was originally built during the Sailendra dynasty that ruled the land between 650 and 1025 AD. It's one of the biggest Buddhist temples anywhere on the planet, and was the site of great pilgrimages up until the 15th century, when the temple was abandoned and the local Javanese gave up Buddhism and converted to Islam. The amazing temple was rediscovered by explorers in 1814. Since then, it has come under the scrutiny of archaeological investigations by both the local Javanese and the Dutch. It was designated a UNESCO site in 1991. However, there still isn't much known about the time in which the temple was constructed. There are no records existing today that detail why it was built or who commissioned it in the first place. The only clues archaeologists have to go on are the artistic comparisons made between reliefs and inscriptions found elsewhere in Southeast Asia. It was obviously influenced heavily by the introduction of Indian cultures during the 1st century, when merchants that practiced Hinduism and Buddhism settled in the region and married into the local population. The Javanese and Indians mixed, and this resulted in a unique blend of cultures that persists to this very day. The Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is located in the heart of the Chinese capital, Beijing. It's a self-contained city in its own right, walled off from the rest of Beijing by a giant moat that's up to 150 feet wide in some places. It's absolutely enormous and is comprised of over 90 palace compounds and 98 buildings. It's a mysterious vestige of what the old Chinese dynasties that ruled from within the walls once looked like. This was the center of China for over 500 years, both politically and ritually. Construction of the Forbidden City began in 1402 when the Chengzu Emperor changed the capital from Nanjing to Beijing to start his own city. It was completed in 1420 and has since been the home of 24 emperors throughout both the Ming Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty. The last emperor of Imperial China lived inside the Forbidden City, but was expelled in 1925. To this day, the Forbidden City remains the most important cultural heritage site in the People's Republic of China. In comparison, it's the White House of China, only many hundreds of years older, and far less known to the outside world. Thanks for watching! Which of these amazing historical places would you like to visit, or have you already? Let me know in the comments below. And remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. See you later! Bye!